Kendall Mitchell was bringing him to see a counselor for help that afternoon. Down on the main floor, Marianne Jackson sat alert at the CTV reception desk. She'd been worried about the building since the quake 5 months earlier. Although the building had been inspected afterwards, visible cracks later emerged in some walls, and Jackson was worried it might collapse if the ground shook again. Her colleagues had become accustomed to seeing her sprint outside whenever she felt an aftershock. Up on the 4th floor, Tamara Svetanova and 5 fellow students were eating lunch in the kitchen area of the King's Education Language School. The native of Serbia had been a pediatrician before moving to New Zealand a decade earlier, and had enrolled at the school as part of her effort to recertify as a doctor in New Zealand. A few blocks away, Anne Brower was sitting on Red Bus 702 with 8 other passengers. A lecturer in environmental policy at Lincoln University, she was on her way to a meeting and was reading The Economist magazine as she traveled. The earthquake started at 12:51 with a powerful upward thrust. At the CTV reception desk, Marianne Jackson waited a few seconds, then ran for the exit, feeling like the building was chasing after her. By the time she reached the other side of the street, the 6-story structure had pancaked into a dust-shrouded mound of rubble. Only the north sheer wall and the elevator shaft stood. Kendall Mitchell's infant daughter was still strapped into the stroller when the shaking started. All Mitchell could do was grab the stroller and wrap her arm around her son as the building started to collapse beneath them. The interior wall in front of them fell away from the ceiling, and a glimpse of daylight suddenly appeared through a crack above. Mitchell then felt the sensation of being sucked downward as the floor dropped rapidly. She clutched her children and hung on until falling debris knocked her unconscious. People outside watched in horror as the CTV building twisted and lurched in multiple directions. The windows exploded in unison as the concrete columns on the 5th floor collapsed, and floor after floor plummeted to the ground. Witness estimates of time can be unreliable, but investigators concluded the tragic chain reaction was over less than 20 seconds after the shaking started. Many of the more than 200 people who were inside the building were crushed almost instantly, but some survived the collapse. When Kendall Mitchell regained consciousness, she saw Jet holding her hand and Ditta still very much alive in the stroller. Jet was covered in blood, which Mitchell quickly realized was coming from a wound in her head. She'd also suffered a large gash to her leg and a triple fracture to her pelvis, but she was alive and her children were too. The 3 were protected inside a small hole roughly 1 meter high by 1 meter wide. A steel beam directly above them protected them from a fatal blow. They were now entombed in a tangle of shattered glass, broken concrete, and bats of pink insulation. Mitchell wiggled her foot out of the rubble, but soon realized the broken bits of building above her were just too heavy to move. The elation she felt at surviving the building's collapse was soon eclipsed by the smell of smoke. Would she survive an earthquake only to die in the fire that followed? Outside the wreckage, stunned survivors stood on the street, trying to come to grips with the scene in front of them. In spite of the shock, a spontaneous army of bystanders burst into action, climbing among the wreckage, searching for anyone who might have survived the building's collapse. Evan McClellan was working as a plasterer at the nearby St. Paul's Trinity Pacific Presbyterian Church and was still eating lunch when the shaking started. He saw the CTV building go down and ran to the wreckage as soon as the dust cleared. McClellan was one of several who formed a human chain to help survivors down the pile of rubble. But when the trickle of shocked people stumbling out of the wreckage stopped, he worried others might still be trapped inside. "The cops told me to stay put," he told the New Zealand Herald, "but I knew time was precious, so I did a runner. Something told me to go round the corner of the building where all the smoke was coming from." McClellan scrambled across mangled beams and broken slabs of concrete, steeling himself for the shock of seeing dead bodies. Instead, he heard a woman calling out.